Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Code Breakdown. My name is Drew from UpTech, and today we're going to be talking about contributing to open source. Specifically, today I wanted to focus on a different type of contribution. We're going to be contributing to one of UpTech's open source libraries, Constraid, which is written in Swift, and it's a library for Mac OS X and for iOS. And my point with this is to really kind of show people that not all contributions have to be super overwhelming. Even things like adding features to libraries and things like that can be relatively straightforward. And there's lots of examples in most cases where you can easily kind of figure out what to do. So let's get started. So let's look at what issues exist. It looks like we have some plans for v3, and we want to add some methods like limit height, limit width, expand height, and then this is not targeted for 3.0 and this is not targeted for 3.0. So let's focus on expand height, right? Let's say we want to tackle this one. Cool. It really just says that we want to add a function called expand height, which takes a constrained view and a float and expands the height of this view from some constant floating point number. So let's assign this to ourselves and let's get started. So I have the Constraid project directory open right here, which I cloned earlier. Let's make sure what branch I'm on. I'm in a detached state. So let's make sure I'm on master and I have the latest. I do. All right, and now let's launch the Constraid Xcode project. Remember, right here I'm looking for, is there an XC workspace? If there was an XC workspace, I'd open that, but because there's not, I'm going to go straight for the Xcode project file. So I open that, and that launches Xcode over here. All right, and we can take a look. Let's just look to see if there are any other methods called expand or with expand in the name, because that might be a good example for us to base our stuff off of. So if we go in here, we can look for global search for expand. Oh, it looks like there's a bunch. And there's expand from edge, which is a Swift file that has a bunch. There's expand from margin, which has a bunch. Then there's expand from size, which already has a expand view from width. And it also has an expand from height. So let's see. Let's go look at these. So we have expand constrains the object's width to be greater than or equal to the width of item. Parameter item A, the item you want to constrain in relation to another. Item B, the item you want to constrain item A against. Parameter multiplier is the ratio altering this. Interesting. So this expands view from width of item B. So this actually does what we want, kind of, except it's in relation to another view. So this is saying expand view from the size of whatever this other view is. In our case, we're talking about adding a function which is to expand the view from some constant. So let's see what else exists. So there's some manage size tests that look similar. So here's a test for expand width. And this calls expand width of view from some constant with some priority, and then activates it and then verifies that the resulting constraint exists as we expect. So that is actually exactly what we want, except in our case, we want to do expand height, not expand width. So this is in a manage size tests file. So that's probably a good indicator that if we look for a manage size actual file, manage intrinsic size relations, manage size Swift. So there's match height, match width, set height, expand width, set width. All right, so if we are following suit, we're basically going to be implementing the equivalent of this, but for height. So we can start out by making sure everything's green, make sure this builds. Let's just pick a simulator. I have too many simulators installed. So build successfully. Let's run the test suite. Make sure all the tests pass green before we start changing anything. Testing, testing, testing. All right, all right. All the tests succeeded. Excellent. All right, now we're ready to go make a branch. Get checkout-b, and we're gonna call this add expand height. Okay. What is that must be a side effect of the new Xcode. That's okay. Ignore that for now. We'll worry about that in a separate branch later on. Okay. So let's start out with the tests. So there's manage size tests. There's this test set width, test expand width, test set height, and we're going to have test expand height. Let's duplicate that test real quick. We'll rename this to expand height. And then we're going to call a different method, which is going to be the expand height method of view1. We want to expand the height of view1. We can say from 10, the priority of 500. That should be fine. Now to validate that that actually works, we need to come in here. We can grab the constraint. We can say that the first item is the view1. We can say the first attribute is going to be height, not width. The relationship is going to be greater than or equal because we're talking about expanding from a specific height up to something else. And then the second item is nil. We can assert that there is no attribute. We can then assert that the constant is 10 and the priority of that constraint is UI layout priority of 500. And then we assert that translates auto resizing mask constraint is false. So our test looks sound. It's obviously failing, and it's going to be failing because we don't have a member called expand height yet. We haven't actually built that. So let's go see if we can make that satisfied. So in order to do that, we can go to manage size, and let's actually copy stuff again. So we can copy the docs too. So then we'll order things exactly the way they were already. So there was a set width, then there was an expand width, then there's a set height, and then we'll do an expand height. So let's call this expand height. It's gonna have a view, it's gonna have a constant, it's gonna have a priority, it's gonna return a constraint collection. So that's all the same. So let's make sure the docs match. Expand the height of the receiver using the constraint and auto layout. Parameter item, the item you want to constrain. Constant, the minimum height to expand from, and then priority, the priority this constraint uses when being evaluated against other constraints, and returns a constraint collection containing the generated constraint. Cool. And then we have this discardable result annotation or attribute, or I can't remember what they call it in Swiftland, but it's basically a compiler annotation. And this says that when people call this method, even though it returns a collection, they're allowed to ignore that and not be forced to use the return value. And then we are doing this item translates auto resizing mask into constraints false, because we take care of that for the user as a friendly thing to do. And then we do collection, constraint, constraint collection. We hand it an array of NS layout constraints, which is the low level raw constraint class. And so we're gonna have an item. We're now not talking about width. We're now talking about height. And then we're gonna say related is definitely greater than or equal, because we're talking about expanding from some smaller value up to a larger value. We don't have another item. There is no attribute. The multiplier is 1, and the constant is some constant with some priority. And that looks like it's complete. So at this point, we can try to build again. The build succeeded. That's good. So we've compiled successfully, and now we can run our tests again. All the tests succeeded. So if we look in our test results, we can actually find and see where this happened. So there's an expand width, there's expand height, which just passed green as well. So we've successfully contributed and added this method to this library, which will allow users of this library to set constraints to expand the height of a view from some specific hard-coded number. And that is that. Let's go look at what our git diff looks like. Looks like we have that. All right, let's make a pull request real quick. Constraid test, manage size test. So here's our diff. Our diff consists of a test to unit test it, and consists of the function itself. And that's about it. Let's commit it. Let's say add expand height method to manage size so that users can expand the height of a view relative to a constant value. And then we can reference issue number 66. there anything else we want to say? I can't think of anything else. So let's just commit that. Push -u origin, add expand height. Let's go back over here. You can see here, let's compare and create pull request. Add expand height method so the user can expand the height of the view relative to a constant value. This relates to issue 66. Looks good to me. The diff looks pretty good. The documentation looks sound. The implementation looks sound. And the test looks sound. So let's create pull request. And then this is going to run CI, and that'll give us feedback to make sure everything still passes in CI land. But that's pretty much it. We can go check out the CI, see if we're in the queue or if it's gonna start running soon. Going through, installing CocoaPods, all the dependencies. It's using Xcode build test. That. It's running the build target, checking for dependencies. Bunch of noisy output. Some Swift. It's going through the build process. We're just seeing a bunch of build output right now. It's running all the test cases. Test succeeded. Sweet. So we can see that our push succeeded is now just doing the PR, which is the merge version of the stuff we pushed up. It's going to actually merge our branch and master branch together in another branch. So it's like doing a back merge of master into another branch. And then Travis CI is running the tests on that to let us know that when our branch is integrated with master, that is also successful, as well as when our branch is just standalone. And that should pass as well. I don't see any reason why it wouldn't, because there shouldn't be anything else additional in master. And it looks like it passed. There we go. All green. We've officially made a contribution. And now it's up to someone to peer review this and approve it, and then merge it in for us. But we've officially made a contribution to the Constraid library and added a feature that will help us get closer to deploying and launching version 3.0. And it was much easier than our contribution to Jazzy, largely because it was just a much smaller scope task with a very specific limitation around what was expected. And that's one benefit around like looking for tasks in open source projects that you're interested in that are needed. Oftentimes you can find things like this that are relatively limited in scope and therefore is kind of a easier task to figure out what's going on versus like what we did with Jazzy in the previous episodes, where like lots of debugging and trying to figure out how the thing currently worked in all of its glory. Like we in this example we didn't actually learn how all of Constraid worked. All we did was learn how expand width worked and then replicate that to implement expand height. So I hope you enjoyed. See you next time.